we are going to talk about the Tudors during this Be History series, but before, we are going to have a look at their predecessor, Richard III. So, Anna, was Richard III really a tyrant, or was it only Tudor propaganda?
Well, Richard III, of course, is having been, obviously long dead, and long dead in many people's sort of interest. Of course, in recent months, that interest has very much revived with the discovery of his body. And there's been a whole sort of popular discussion really in the press about Richard III, and does this prove that he was or wasn't a tyrant? We know that he had a curved spine, and Shakespeare had portrayed him as a hunchback. So, can we think therefore that Shakespeare was reliable in his portrayal of Richard more generally? Well, of course, Shakespeare was a Tudor propagandist in many ways, and so his portrayal of Richard III, like other Tudor chroniclers, people like Polydore, Virgil and Holinshed, was basically to big up the success of the Tudors in, Henry VII, first of all, defeating Richard III, and emphasising that the Tudors were bringing in a period of peace and sort of stability after the tyrannical rule of Richard III. So it was very much kind of emphasising Richard as a kind of evil figure. So I think we have to accept that in many ways how we understand Richard and his reputation has been very much down to the making of Tudor propagandists. There's obviously, the jury is very much out whether he killed the princes in the Tower, his nephews. Some would say, that he didn't. Some would say that he did. There's certainly evidence that he was quite harsh in his attempt to impose his rule. So, I think in many ways, it's fair to say that there were sort of tyrannical aspects of Richard's kingship. However, we also have to appreciate the context of the times. This was a period of civil war, profound instability. It was the Wars of the Roses. So trying to impose yourself on the throne was, by its nature, going to be a bloody business.
His reign was really short, right? So what legacy did he leave?
Well, in many cases, I think the legacy, because of the controversy over whether he, for example, murdered the princes in the Tower, because of his short reign, in many ways his legacy was malleable. It was able to be shaped by the Tudors that followed. It was kind of, he didn't impose himself and wasn't on the throne long enough to perhaps stamp a kind of clear authority on the reputation that followed. And because of the ambiguity of his rule, tyrannical, murderous, and so on. He may well have, ordered the killing of his brother, for example. There was all kinds of sort of stories and rumours about Richard. But it's also true that, as historians are increasingly acknowledging that, rather than Henry VII being simply this new monarch who suddenly almost started from scratch and built up this sort of very, in many cases, sort of, relatively modern, streamlined government, or certainly the beginnings of it, historians are emphasising that in many ways Henry was following precedents set down by Edward IV, who of course was Richard III's predecessor, and continued by Richard himself. So in many ways the legacy is, there is a kind of continuity in some of the government practice. But I think there's, his legacy is very disputed.